Okay, you can always tell when I'm doing the handouts, they're in bold print and big type, so big fonts, right? And actually, Ecclesiastes 12 tonight talks about that. We'll get to that chapter in just a moment. But it's good to see everybody. I'm going to work through Ecclesiastes 11 and 12 with you tonight, and then we're going to let the ladies take off and go over that way and have their conversation, and the guys will stay in here. We'll have our conversation. David is still home with a bad back. He preached Sunday morning with a bad back and then kind of crawled his way through the first part of the week, and I just said, stay home, study for Sunday. You're too young to have a bad back, you know. But I know he would appreciate your prayers, and as always, he would love to be here. He loves the Word, he loves the truth, he loves to teach, but pray for him. It's an interesting thing. If you've ever had back problems, you know they don't go away easily. They come upon you suddenly, and they don't go away easily. And for him in particular, when you stand up here for 40 minutes or more on a Sunday morning, that tightens your back up pretty tight. So, well, I told him, I said, I've done it in a wheelchair. I had both of my feet, I had surgery on both of my feet one time over at the other church, and they picked me up in my wheelchair and put me up there, and I had to lock the wheel so I didn't roll off the front of the thing. And it was interesting, but we do what we do, right?
You didn't do one of those miraculous heals?
Well, I could have done that, but I know I would. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because I had a cane or something, and it was Doug. Doug was one of the guys helping me up here, and I whacked him on the rear end as he went down, and I said, "My rod and my staff help me," But so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to finish Ecclesiastes. So I need everybody to hear what I'm about to say. Tonight is the last study on Wednesday night of Ecclesiastes. The elders, through a lot of prayer and thinking and discussion, we've come to the conclusion that with the resources we have, we want to really pour our energy into Sunday morning. We're going to give us some relief on Wednesday night for now. We'll come back to that later. But we're going to, if we have classes to do, we're going to try to do those second hour on Sunday morning. Our thinking is that if you take the time to get your kids dressed and fed and get them here on Sunday morning, you're already here. It's a lot easier for you to stay for one more hour than it is to do all that again on a Wednesday night or a night during the week. And so there will come a time when we'll do all of it and do all of it well, but we want to make sure that we don't do so many different things that we diffuse our congregation and the people that are serving. However, having said that, Martha, I think, has a plan to continue on Wednesday night, so I want to encourage the ladies, get with her about that, and she's got some great ideas about how you guys will carry on that study for a while. But as far as a whole church invitation, Wednesday night now will be the youth, the TSOL, which Robin's heading up, and then the women will meet as long as they choose to meet as well. So, how did I do that? So, tonight, 2 words, uncertainty and certainty, right? This is the world we live in. There are certain things that are certain, and that's chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes. He talks about the dying process and death and being judged by God. And then there's the uncertain things in life, which are all the things we want to be in control of that we never seem to be in control of. So we're going to look at this. So you have a handout there. And what I've given you is not really an outline as such of the 2 chapters, so much as some observations that we'll make along the way as we look at this. So we go to Ecclesiastes. So somebody tell me in one sentence only, Tell me your understanding of the theme or the point of the book of Ecclesiastes. What have you learned so far? One sentence, like...
How about one word? Futility.
Yeah, futility. There you go. Right. I was thinking of, when I said one sentence only, I was thinking of that scene in Hunt for Red October where he goes, one ping only. Yeah, right? So, futility. And what does that mean?
No point.
There's no point. Yeah, it's just like the actual Hebrew phrase or word has the idea of just air, just nothingness. Well, hot air, yeah. So somebody else, anything else? What are you learning from the book of Ecclesiastes? Everybody have a handout? You have it? Travis, did you get a handout? Okay. What else? Come on, real quick. Ecclesiastes. One sentence, one phrase, one word. Vanity. Okay.
Unhappy.
See, this is funny to me. Okay, so a man says futility and a woman says vanity. That's interesting to me. It's actually the same word, but different perspective, right? Oh, somebody else was going to say?
Just unhappy, too. It seems like he's just about the things of the world, complaining and unhappy.
Unhappy? I'm sorry, what? Yeah, things in the world will not make you happy. I think it's in the first or second chapter, a little bit more modern translation says, it's an unhappy business, this life that God has given us. It's an acknowledgement. Jesus says it differently later. He says, in this life you will have tribulation. And he was talking, of course, to his disciples about the possibility of being persecuted or suffering for their faith or following in Jesus. But the reality is, no matter how we mess with our theology, no matter how many words we come up with to create a biblical theology of happiness and joy, the reality is the world we live in is not the best world. And if you're living a pretty good life, you know, you haven't had much serious illness, not a whole lot of financial struggles, relationships in your family are pretty good. Even that's hard. But then you go to the other end of the extreme. Aren't you glad you're not living in Turkey tonight? Aren't you glad you're not living in Syria or Venezuela? It's just the world is in a very, very, very bad way right now. So the way I'm going to summarize this is that chapter 11 is about uncertainty. I'll get to that in a minute. And I've summarized chapter 11 for you. Beware of playing it safe. And I'll explain why I came to that conclusion as I study that chapter. Chapter 12 is about certainty. The certainty of death. And not just the certainty of death, but the reality that, and I know Solomon was not a statistician. He didn't have a whole bunch of guys cranking out numbers for him like our politicians do. But he surely had observed that for the most part, and it's been true throughout human history, most people don't die in wars or meteors hitting them or falling off of a cliff. Most of us die a slow, agonizing death. It starts when they slap us on the bum as we come out of the womb, and the dying process begins even then, back then. And so Solomon talks about this, and he talks about how as we get older, it becomes more and more and more apparent what is happening in our bodies.
I had a doctor tell me one time, you're not 17 anymore.
Doctor says, you're not 17 anymore. And you said, yeah, that's the best you could come up with, Doc? That's why they call it practicing medicine, right? So chapter 11, one of the strangest verses in the Bible, and it's even stranger once you get all the different interpretations. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. And we'll come back to that in just a moment, but they're all over the page. Theologians and commentators are all over the page about what that means. But keep it in context. The context, the whole of chapter 11 is in the context of the uncertainty. the reality that you and I can't, no matter what we do, we cannot be certain about what will happen. That's the context, so that'll help us interpret that verse in a minute. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Verse 2, give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And I love this verse. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. Isn't that a great verse? I was thinking, if the guy who said, you remember, I'm sorry, what? Oh, yeah. I was thinking about that guy who said, yeah, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, am I still wrong? When my wife rebukes me. What's he saying? He's saying, look, there are things that happen in life. They just happen. And you have no control over them. If a tree falls, whether it falls to the north or to the south, it lies right there, and that's where it is.
He's saying it's not a rolling stone.
That's right. There you go. Anyway, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in a womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So, if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them. Light is good for us. Light, in this context, the light in the eyes is about life, having liveliness, having life. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All comes to vanity. So the days of light are the years that we live on this earth. The days of dark, in the mind of Solomon and the Hebrews, they didn't have a really advanced understanding of eternity. They basically had an idea of that the dead go to Sheol, and the idea of heaven and Jesus coming and all the elaboration of all that we have in the New Testament. All those were mysteries in the Old Testament that the apostles and Jesus revealed in the New Testament. So he's basically saying you're going to have light, and then it's going to be dark for a long time. You're going to live, and then you're going to die, and you're going to be in the place of the abode of the dead. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. I think what he's saying here is, look, be happy, find joy in your life. Follow your heart. Okay, I'm going to say this. Follow your heart, which is kind of the thing that's going on in our world today. I think he's saying, follow your heart, what's in the ways of your heart, and what you see with your eyes. However, there's a however here that's not in our world today. The however is, remember that all these things, what's in your heart and what you see with your eyes, God will bring you into judgment. Okay, so follow your heart as long as you have the discipline to know, and your heart has the discipline to know that what has to come out of your heart and what you do with what you see with your eyes has to be honoring to God and to fear God and to keep His commandments. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Okay, so let's summarize this. I think what Solomon is saying here is, if I could paraphrase, I've written all this whole book to you, reminding you that no matter what happens in your life, you cannot control your life. And there's nothing in this world, in the condition that it's in, will ever give you joy or happiness. And even if it does, it will only be for a brief moment. And I think he's saying to us, you should be wise enough to understand that you're living in a fallen world, and therefore be cautious, because what's going to happen is, if you're not careful, if you don't guard your heart, you're going to start playing it safe. And you're going to play it safe, and you're going to think that by playing it safe that you're smarter than this fallen world, and it's not going to work. So when he says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days, there are all kinds of interpretations. The best I've come up with is something like this, There's a way that they would trade on the ocean. They would send ships out on the ocean, and they would take their goods and they would put them on ships, and what he's saying is, do that, invest, take what you have, cast it out there on the waters, and it'll come back to you after many days, but you don't know when and how it will come back to you. Give a portion to 7 or even 8. Any financiers in here? Travis, you manage money for a company. Maybe he's saying, hey, take what you have, put it here and here and here and here and here, 7 or 8 places. Don't put it all in one place, because you do not know what disaster may happen on the earth. All right? Don't just pick Enron. Remember Enron? Right? Put all your money in Enron. So what he's saying is, it's okay to think about the disastrous way the world works, and it's okay to be thinking about how I'm going to do these things, but don't let your diligence turn into arrogance. Don't think for 1 minute that you're going to figure out. You want to be wise with what you have. You want to be good stewards of what you have. But the reality is, if you spend too much time, verse 3, if you're looking at the clouds and they're full of rain and they empty themselves on the earth, and if you're trying to figure out about the clouds and when it's going to rain, and if you're worried about this falls there and that falls there, verse 4, if you're worried about that stuff, and if you observe the wind, if you're standing there on your front porch going, I don't know if I should plant today. It looks like it might rain. What does the Weather Channel say? I wish we had a little black box that knows everything. Oh, wait, we do. There's the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel says it's going to rain at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I don't know. I don't think I'm going to. If you spend your time reading the signs, you're going to convince yourself that you're really good at it, right? You're going to read the stock market. You're going to win a few, and you're going to go, yeah, it's a piece of cake. Like a young guy said to me recently, he said, it's simple. He said, stock market's simple. And I thought, do I let him down now, or do I just let him lose a bunch of money first? It's not simple. It's a complicated thing, and there's a lot of psychology to it. If you, and that's why he gets to the end of the book, the end of this book, and he says, of the making of many books, there's no end, and of much study, it's weariness of the flesh. What's he saying? You think that because you can read, you can read enough, and you can study enough, that you can become competent enough that you can outsmart the fallen world. I think that's what he's saying. And it's not in the Hebrew, but it's something like nanny nanny boo boo. It doesn't work that way, right? So, if you stand there observing the wind or looking at the clouds, you won't sow and you won't reap. And if you don't know the way that the Spirit comes to the bones of a child in the womb, how are you going to even figure out the work of God who makes everything? The most basic thing in all of life is that a husband and a wife come together and they co-create, they procreate, they co-create. It's happened billions of times in the history of mankind. It happened 3 times in our family. It was an amazing thing. And I stood in awe and wonder as I watched our babies come into the world, and I held them, before they even cleaned them up. There I was holding this little thing. I can't tell you at what point the Spirit of God gave breath to that child. I can't tell you how that happened. And there's not a doctor or a scientist in the world. They can tell you everything about that process, but they can't tell you how God goes like that and that baby comes alive as a human being, even today. So, if in the morning you sow your seed, and in the evening you withhold not your hand, if you do that, then you will prosper. If you stop looking and trying to read the signs, and stop trying to think that you're smarter than this fallen world, and stop trying to think that you're so competent and you can learn so much that you can read all the signs of everything, but just be diligent. Just get up in the morning and go sow your seed. Don't worry about trying to figure it out, because God knows. And there's a point at which human beings have to say, I don't know. I don't know. It's three of the most important words that a Christian or a human being ever says. I don't know. It's interesting to me that thousands of years later, after Adam and Eve's sin in the garden, what's that? Oh, is that?
I thought I shut it off.
Yeah, it's okay. Thousands of years after Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, we're still dealing with the same sin. It's the same exact sin that he's dealing with here that he dealt with Adam and Eve. What did the enemy say? He said, you're smarter than you think you are. And God is holding something back from you. And there's mystery in this because you choose to have mystery. If you just eat this fruit, then you will know everything that God knows. You'll have insight into everything. And what they learned in the next few minutes was more than they were ever created to bear. It's the same sin nowadays. It's the same sin in the church. It's the same sin in the world. We want to know everything. We want to be in control of everything. It's what Solomon's dealing with. If you think that you can read enough books and you can, watch enough YouTube videos, if you think you can get smart enough that you can outsmart a fallen world, then you're crazy. And what happens is when you start doing that, you start playing it safe. And playing it safe is never the calling of the Christian. Not everything that's dangerous is bad for you. But avoiding danger can be deadly. Do you know what I mean by that? If we're constantly playing it safe, we are not living by faith. We're not living by trust in the Lord. If our whole life is energized by avoiding being risk averse in everything, then we're not trusting the Lord. You cannot outsmart the fallen world. You can't play it safe enough. And if that doesn't convince us, then chapter 12 should convince us, because every one of us, when we read Ecclesiastes chapter 12, we go, yeah, me too. That's me. So beware of playing it safe, and know that in the end, death is going to catch up with you. But that's not the end of the story for us. Chapter 12. I love this. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. When's the last time you thought, there's nothing tastes good to me anymore? Every time I sit up in bed, my back hurts, my neck hurts. I can't hear what I want to hear. I can't hardly walk. Well, that's exactly what Solomon's talking about. He's an old man. This is probably very autobiographical. He's saying, it's time to give your life to and your attention to your Creator and obeying Him and honoring Him before you get to the time when it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. I bet you I've heard 100 times, no exaggeration, over the last 50 years, businessmen say that they say this to me. They say, I'm going to work and I'm going to retire early and I'm going to have enough money to serve God. I've got some real plans for serving God when I retire. And I always say the same thing. No, you won't. Because if you're not serving Him now, you're not going to serve Him then. Your heart is going to harden over time, and you're going to convince yourself. You're going to get to this point where you're really tired, and your body hurts, and the whole world hurts, and you're not going to have the time or the energy or the inclination to serve the Lord. You serve Him when you're young. You'll serve Him when you're old. But if you don't, and you think you're going to, you're just kidding yourself. Don't wait till later. Solomon also says here that the dying process is difficult and certain. Have you ever read this? This is fascinating. Okay, I have no pleasure in them. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. Okay, he's talking about now when we start to get old. In the days when the keepers of the house, that's your hands, when the keepers of your house tremble, and the strong men, that's your legs, are bent, and the grinders, what's the grinders? Your teeth. Yeah, your grinders. It says, grinders cease because they are few, right? And start losing those teeth. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. What's he talking about? Yeah, sure. Your eyes are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. When's the last time you said to somebody, I'm not sleeping very well these days? I think I said that 4 times today. So we can't hear, and yet something wakes us up in the middle of the night, and everybody that's around us supposed to be doing things, they're going, shh, be quiet. You know, he finally fell asleep. And there's a fear of being up in heights, and there's terrors everywhere, and tripping and falling, and the almond tree blossoms. What's that about? Anybody ever seen an almond tree blossom? It's beautiful white. He's saying your hair, your almond tree is going to blossom in beautiful white. Everything's going to slow down. The grasshopper drags itself along. Your desire fails. Your sexual desire fails. Your enjoyment of food fails. The idea that you're going to Disney World with your grandkids doesn't excite you anymore. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my life and my savings. I mean, he's very graphic here, right? This is what happens. This is where we're going. And but if you take this particular pill, or if you use this particular special thing that you mix in your drink, or if you have a special smoothie every morning, all this goes away, and your skin will be light and beautiful, and people will look at you and they think you're 35 years younger than you really are. Not. So that's who we are, right? That's where we're going. He goes on to talk about the mourners going about the streets. Verse 6, the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken. Some people say this refers to the golden bowl is the skull, and the silver cord is the spine. I take it a little bit differently because of the next phrase. It says, the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel is broken at the cistern. I take it to mean that the golden bowl in Solomon's life was this beautiful golden bowl that held a candle, and it was hung by this beautiful strand. And the idea is that something of such value and such beauty, when that cord snaps, it just shatters on the floor. That's the way we are. Our lives are very valuable to us and to God, but they shatter so easily. And it's like going down to the fountain or to the cistern, to the well, and seeing that the pitcher no longer works, and the wheel that lets the pitcher down is broken, and the pitcher goes down and shatters at the bottom because there's no water in the well. That's where you're headed. Have a nice day, right? That's where we're headed. That's how Solomon describes, I believe, what he's going through himself right now, because he's an old man when he's writing this. And I think he's sitting there thinking, you know what? You can try all you want to make this go away. You can read all the books on, staying young. You can go to the cryogenic place and give them a bunch of money, and they're just going to freeze your dead body. They're not going to bring you back to life. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen to us. It's going to happen to us, every one of us, unless the Lord returns. And some of us are closer than others if the natural part of life carries on. And so that clock is ticking in the back of our heads. But I think what he's saying is, don't play it safe. Trust God. Be faithful in what you're supposed to be doing. Be diligent. If you're going to sow, sow. If you're going to reap. Don't pull back. Don't hide. Don't be afraid. The number one command in Scripture, given more than any other command in Scripture, is do not be afraid, do not fear. It's spoken over and over and over again. And he's saying, obey God now while you're young. And you say, but I'm not young. But you're younger today than you're going to be next year. So now is the time for us to turn to God, to obey Him, knowing that death is coming, it's certain, but that it's not the end for us. The older we are, the harder it becomes to love and obey God. Did you ever, did you ever have this mythology, this narrative in your brain that as we get older, it should become easier? You walk with the Lord for 30 years, it should be easier to walk with Him, right? Yeah? You got some momentum going, you learned a lot of wisdom. I'm not finding that to be true. And am I the only unspiritual person in the room? Or are you finding that as well? There's something about, when you can't think clearly, when your mind's in a fog, when your body's hurting all the time, when you can't do things like you used to be able to do, you can't remember things the way you used to, it's harder. You have to work harder the older you get to maintain just the same altitude in the spiritual life. And then he challenges us because he knows that among us there are those who think, well, I can beat this. I'm omnicompetent. I can solve this problem. And he says, don't think that by reading more information you can eliminate the uncertain and forestall the inevitable. And that's what he says. The words of the wise are like goads. They prick us, but they are also like nails firmly fixed. And they are given by the shepherd. Verse 12, my son, beware of anything beyond these. He's saying, listen to the wisdom that the Word of God gives you and beware of everything else. And especially beware of what you trust in. If you think that by reading 15 books next month, or if you think by watching a bunch of videos or getting yourself all competent and ginned up to do these things, that somehow you're going to win, it's not the way it works, he says. Of the making of many books, there is no end, and you're just creating weariness in your life. So here's the end of the matter. Here he says, okay, I'm going to give you the mic drop here, okay? Here's the end of it. I've said all I'm going to say. All has been heard. Write this down. Fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. And remember verse 14, that God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now, that's an excursion bus through 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to trust you guys when you get to the room over there, and when we stay in here, we'll flesh this out as we go. But you've got 35 minutes to have some conversation, so why don't you go, ladies are going to go that way, guys are going to stay in here, and we'll talk about this.